So yeah, I've first got attracted to anarchism or learned about anarchism during the Bush years, and this was, when there was the Black Bloc protesting the Iraq War. It's funny for me, kind of like looking at how the anarchists who are sort of involved politically, or at least most vocally, their politics has seemed, from my opinion, to change a bit from that time period, where a lot of anarchists who you'd see out there were anti-war, anti-imperialist. And I've been noticing more and more over recent years, there seems to be more pro-imperialist sentiments within anarchism, where there seems to be more apologies for Washington and more kind of siding with Washington against, the authoritarian, tanky regimes overseas. It seems as though a weaponization of anarchism in favor of U.S. foreign policy. I'm just curious if you've noticed that too.
Yeah, I would say with the March 2020, everything seemed to flip, and and I was shocked that anarchist friends of mine would actually be posting initially before there was like the drumbeat of war with Russia was happening. The whole COVID, like people I organized against Big Pharma with then were demanding people get the injections from the same Big Pharma they were protesting only months before. And I found that shocking. And then there was a Facebook profile, I don't know what they call them, what goes around your face, where it was like, fuck authority, I'm vaccinated, in red and black. And I had a bunch of friends that I organized with that were anarchists that put that on their faces. And then I had, then there's a number of like really other prominent anarchists and who would then post that they were wanting people to get the vaccine. There was even punks for vaccine that were led by anti-fascist punk groups, who would then also so it's, and there's even there were anarchist organizations that organized pro-mandate, pro-lockdown marches in Melbourne, Australia, and things. So then it flipped to Russia bad, and so we had like a global food not bomb Zoom meeting, and there a lot of the people that lived in the former, I mean, they weren't alive when the former Soviet Union was controlling events in Eastern Europe, but they were like, so like, we brought up the idea that we wanted to have like a unified, no invasion of, by Russia of Ukraine, and NATO, and abolish NATO. And there was huge pushback. No, Putin is Hitler. Putin is Hitler. We need to arm Ukrainians. We need to arm Ukrainians. And there was huge denial of Azov or, right sector or any of the other groups that Food Not Bomb's kids were writing me about in the 8 years since the U.S. coup of Ukraine. And a lot of my information about what was going on in Ukraine was happening directly between me and correspondence between me and Ukrainian anarchists about Azov and Bandera movements and so on. And then all that, once February 24th of 2022 happened, we lost all contact with anarchists in Ukraine, and there became kind of this tension where it was like we stopped having these global Zoom meetings because it was like, we're so divided between whether NATO should be shut down and whether, there was a belief that the U.S. was, fighting NATO, Putin, and that was super important, and that who cares if Biden administration and Obama administration had overthrown the government and put in their own people. Like somehow that, and it was shocking because I've been in anti-NATO protests from as early as '92 in Europe, and participated in the anti-NATO protests in Istanbul back when Bush was speaking in support of NATO there. And the left used to be against war, we used to be against, anarchists used to be against censorship. That was like a hallmark of one of our ideas. But now many of my anarchist friends are completely in support of censorship, although they will call it misinformation. They bought into that whole thing, and the militarism. It is really quite shocking. So I interviewed with Paul on Winter Oak, who's an anarchist in France, and he and I were in dismay early on in this crisis about how we lost our anarchist friends. And then it was fortunate that podcasts, like Convo Couch and eventually Jimmy Dore and others were like coming from a left perspective about we had these these visions, this we were against corporate power, a corporate dystopia, and so on, and what happened. So I can totally, it's astounding. But when when Paul published my interview on Winter Oak, I received emails and phone calls from anarchists all over the country, like some in tears, because they felt so alone by their anarchist friends bullying them into trying to get the jab, trying to comply with supporting internment of unvaccinated people and all the cruel things that happened early on in the COVID lockdown, part of the country. And then during that, so for me, I've been outside for, it'll be like 1,000 days on the 10th of December that we've shared every single day outside, because the other soup kitchens in Santa Cruz were closed due to the lockdown. And what we witnessed on the streets is completely different than what one would ever imagine if you sat at home and watched the news and listened to NPR and stuff. So it became, there's a definite, it's just really crazy that you, with your own eyes, you can see what is happening. You can experience what is happening. You can base your information on actual scientific information. So I have an anarchist friend who was a leading virologist who came to me and my girlfriend early on, before the jabs came out, saying, whatever you do, don't data and stuff, because during the clampdown, and that freaked her out. Even predating March 2020, she was seeing that something fishy was up, and she was she of course is ignored and silenced and so on by other anarchists, even though she is probably the most knowledgeable in that particular area of any of the other people in the anarchist community that are pushing quarantine and mandates and masking and jabs and all that. And then when the Ukrainian war, it's the same series of lies. So we were out protesting weapons of mass destruction. Victoria Nuland was in Cheney's, an aide to Cheney at the time, pushing this narrative that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and that we should go to war there. And we could see now that Iraq is in total chaos, and from the devastation of the U.S. war against them. Libya, same thing. Syria, same.
Yeah, and you can really tie the U.S. foreign policy here directly back to the Bush administration. They're the ones who announced initially that Ukraine should be joining NATO, and their involvement in the Orange Revolution there. And even going back to Bush ripping up the ABM treaty at the end of 2001, and how that kind of was getting the ball rolling here. So yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it just seems as though there was a very successful psyop to market neoconservatism to the left. Everywhere from centrist liberals to anarchists. And I personally think it goes back a little bit further in 2020, because I was at the Trump inauguration protests in 2017. And the Antifa folks there were all kind of signs that were, like they'd have a flag, the U.S. flag, but they'd have the stars cut out and have the Russian flag. And there were signs about, Putin and Trump. So, I think that was a major part of it too. And it's such an odd thing where, again, just watching the transformation of these folks who were protesting US imperialism to now protesting Russian imperialism and protesting Chinese imperialism, and thinking that somehow, China is more of a right-wing authoritarian state than the United States is. It's seemingly so odd. And if you say anything in line with how the left used to think, if you say that you are still anti-imperialist, that you're against NATO, that you're against censorship, that you're against big pharma or big agriculture, then you're a Nazbol, you're part of this red-brown alliance. And it's so odd to me. And again, it seems to me as though it was really an effective psyop that was done on the left in the United States. Is this the case in Europe as well? Like the leftists and anarchists you talk to in Europe, has there been a similar transformation there, or is this really unique to the United States?
Oh no, there's definitely. I think it's less effective. Their psyops against anarchists in Europe is less effective. But from what Paul, expressed to me in my conversations with him, he was really shocked that a ton of anarchists, and particularly in England, which is where he was publishing out of, even though he lives in France. So he did lose a lot of friends, I think, because they denounced him for being skeptical about the entire program that's happening with both the war in the Ukraine and with and with the COVID lockdown regulations and so on. So I think it is global. Now, I remember at the very beginning, part of the psychops on the COVID area that was super effective, and I would hear this from people in the early days of COVID, was having people wave Trump flags at, like, say, in Lansing, Michigan, with AR-15s and no anti-lockdown, and people, Proud Boys people with swastikas on tattooed and so on, and made that the lockdown movement. And they did a similar thing where there was a anti-lockdown protesters in LA, which may not have even been anti-lockdown protesters, but this is how it's reported in the Los Angeles media, that were stabbing pedestrians, and they had like tattoos all over themselves, and they had Trump flags and all this. And I think that essentially they were probably FBI, and they were trying to give the impression that, and I think this is all well planned out, that they try to make it into like, you're a neo-Nazi if you oppose the lockdowns. You're somehow, I'm accused of being a Trumper. I never would vote for Trump. That's not. I would, if I ever did vote for Trump, it's just to piss off Democrats. It wouldn't be because I thought he had any good policies at all. And then I think also they're really clever at like making the Nazi thing in the U.S., white supremacist, Ku Klux Klan, and all that, which I have been immersed in since, in that world. I have had to survive that since the 60s. So I'm not unaware of the violence and the power of neo-Nazi organizations, Ku Klux Klan, and so on. I mean, we had like a PTA group that was essentially Klan that came to my parents' house and threw rocks through the windows and marched around our house with torches because we defended the only Jewish family in our town from having to be forced to take Christian education against his will and not to be tormented by the other students. So but I think that the anarchists and the left and Democratic Party, they're like trying, even though, as we're finding out, that just like the anarchist community, it's heavily infiltrated by FBI and other surveillance organizations, manipulating events. And I think the classic, I was with Michio Kaku the day that in Washington, D.C. in the 70s when the Greensboro massacre happened. And that's like classic, where you have an FTA agent get a bunch of Klans members to go to an anti-racist protest. The FTA agent pulls his gun out and has been talking real badass, points his gun at the protest, and his Klan buddies that he convinced to go there, they pull the trigger with real live ammo, killing a number of protesters. Yeah, I think that the psychops and the infiltration of basically co-opting the controlled opposition became major in the lead up to the Biden election. And you could see, like, for example, early on, Democracy Now! Interviewed Daszak, Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance, and ran this huge interview about how definitely no possible way it could be a lab leak. And but she knows Sam Husseini, who's a journalist who's done a lot of research on the history of lab leaks, and had published 2 articles early on about it, one in Salon and I forget the other one, on the potential in the history of lab leaks of U.S. biodefense industry. That's in fact how my friend Shannon, who's a virologist, got involved in this, because she was living in Maryland, and and her partner Carl Chasky was he actually went to Johns Hopkins, and they knew that there was really dangerous gain of function work happening, even in the 90s, and were concerned about that. And yet they didn't invite Sam on to counter Daszak. And then you would see, like with Black Lives Matter, it was, instead of being a grassroots movement fighting for emancipation of Black people and ending police violence, you get defund the police becomes, let's set up entire new police state apparatus, like the Capitol Police, and then having offices all around the country, and more surveillance and so on. So, and then the leader, Cori Bush, becoming a congressperson who then does nothing to help the homeless, even though she got elected because she had been a homeless mother, and she voted for funding Nazis in Ukraine, and she did a theater on the steps of the Capitol building, supposedly to stop evictions because of COVID, to extend the eviction moratorium, which completely fell apart instantly, and basically got bought out. So controlled opposition, I would not be, it's really crazy. We went to the Anarchist book fair in Oakland, and there was actually a mask block. There's an anarchist group that were very proud that they gave out so many N95 masks at the outdoor event. And then I have friends that are associates of worked at South End Press and so on, that are just rabidly, which should be one of the more open-minded, cutting-edge presses, of which Michael Albert and Chomsky and them were associated with just totally rabid lockdown proponent and vaccines and so on. So and they received, I have to say, they received funding for, they bought the crisis of the narrative, and therefore applied for money, which they got, to continue their COVID misinformation that they felt was so important. So you can see this throughout all levels of the community, going through, buying into this narrative and accepting money from the same corporations that were also funding.
Well, I think that's 2 different things, right? Because I think that's happened in progressive media, where TYT got investments from Jeffrey Katzenberg. And by the way, I don't know if you saw, but while Jeffrey Katzenberg was lobbying the LA City Council to criminalize homelessness, right when he was doing that same month, Anna Kasparian was ranting about the homeless on TYT.
I do think that there are progressives, I don't know if it's progressive policy, but progressives in places like California who have made terrible decisions. And so one of those terrible decisions is essentially doing away with anti-camping laws, right? Allowing people to camp out wherever they want, whenever they want. And if, we have a homeless problem in California, we have it all throughout the country, but it's particularly bad in California. And so the argument is, well, if there isn't public housing available for people, they should be allowed to camp out. Okay, but there's also a problem right now where there is public housing available and individuals will say, no, I don't want to take it. I don't want to follow the rules in the public housing. And so as a result, I would rather camp out. Progressive lawmakers are like, we should allow them to camp out. And you know what happens? Crime happens. Open air drug markets happen, and it's the truth. These are the facts of the matter. In fact, it was addressed in this Daily Beast article, and honestly, it was cathartic to read it because everyone denies that this is happening.
But not just TYT, we see investments in from the Ford Foundation and Democracy Now, and Pierre Omidyar owns The Intercept. So obviously, I think there's an influence of money. But I just think about like the regular sort of rank and file people, right? Like the hundreds of thousands of people who attended the anti-war protests during the Bush years. What happened to those people? Again, just because I think that like there's such a disconnect from history. Like I think there's just such amnesia, and it seems as though, especially in terms of anarchists, that like the principles have really gone out the window, and memory has gone out the window. And it's not about the fact that the U.S. is the most powerful right-wing police state in history, and that NATO is a neocolonial alliance of these powers that have colonized the entire world. That just goes out the window. The fact that we're sending weapons to literal Nazis and backing literal Nazis in Ukraine, like that's just all ignored, and it becomes very emotional. And I just wish these people would go back and read George Orwell and read 1984, probably the most famous anarchist book ever published. I think that would enlighten them on the psyop that has been conducted on them.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to. I think as society collapses, and more, sadly, more and more of our associates, end up dying from the jabs. That's already a problem that's happening. Maybe they'll wake up. Maybe it'll traumatize enough people to see that they got duped. If this goes to a global world war, will this anarchist community unite and fight back? There are like slight indications of that, but it is amazing that we are basically drumbeats towards nuclear war is daily, and there's like not hardly any response.
I mean, Ukraine just bombed bases where Russia has nuclear capabilities, and you have to wonder how much of that will Russia tolerate before it starts seeing this as an attack by NATO on their nuclear capabilities. And meanwhile, you have these people who are just cheering it on and thinking it's a great thing Ukraine is taking the fight to the Ruskies.
Yeah, it's frightening. And totally ignoring all the different obvious NATO sabotage of pipelines. And then also, what's really horrible, what really disturbed me is, so I've been an anarchist since 1965, and then to see, so I've been a vegan since the 70s, and now the vegan thing has turned into I've been environmentalist forever. I've been anti-racist forever. I've been opposed to homophobia, and now all that's been twisted by the system it's like almost repulsive. So it's not about really dealing with the like if you want to stop climate change and you are an anarchist, one of the things you would be calling for is an end to militarization. Half of all fossil fuels burned in the United States are burned by the U.S. military. You would have a huge impact from that. But instead, there's let's fund that war, but at the same time, go buy electric cars or something. I don't know. It's really, the rank and file definitely has lost its way, and I think maybe older anarchists like myself, we did not build a formidable. I guess we had the illusion that our friends would always remain kind of on this path of non-hierarchical, decentralized organizing and be opposed to militarism, and to always that. I recall like going to another protest in Bonn in '92, and it was labor, environmentalists, human rights activists, all protesting against the single currency of the euro and the European Union, saying that it would end up being this horrible globalization that would go forward. Then I was like, where I first started talking and spending time with Vandana Shiva was in organized against at the People's Global Agenda, which was all, we were divided pretty much half anarchists, half communists and socialists. Thousands of people came to the founding convention, and we were in the streets protesting the World Trade the possibility of the World Trade Organization. I did in 1997. I did the Unfree Trade Tour with anarchists from Spain, because advocating that the IMF, World Bank, that basically from the Bretton Woods Convention after World War II on, there was like this stepping up of a globalized economy, and then the Fourth Industrial Revolution of the World Economic Forum. We used to go protest that all the time. Anarchists were in the streets. You can go and look in old media reports how it was not the right wing that was at Davos protesting, it was the left. And then suddenly those same people now support that same program.